Good morning. Just know, that's the funnest part of what we're about to do, okay? So just get it out of the system. Because this series, this is our third week in the Dancing with Cows, the Dirty Dance of Idols, in this series. And I'll just be really honest with you, it's a tough one. It is. I know it's hard to listen to because it's hard to write. And each week I'm like, all right, Joel, just 2 more weeks, just 2 more weeks. So I'm ready to get through today and be like, all right, Joel, just one more week. Because it's not easy to talk about this. It's not easy to confront this in my life and I'm sure in your life as well. And each week as I sit down, I spend several hours throughout the week, different nights working on the message, crafting it to get ready for today. And each week I sit down, and it doesn't matter what the subject or topic or scripture is, I'm like, God, you've got to write this, because I just don't have the capacity, I don't have the faith even sometimes to do this. And he continually shows up again and again and again in this message. And I say that just little rabbit trail, he'll continually do that in your life. The more you make yourself open and available and faithful to him and to his word. Now, he really answered it this week. Really, because it was like, God, I don't know where to go with this or how to do this. We're going to kind of get unique this morning. And then as I was writing, even last night, an illustration came up that's going to kind of be woven throughout. And this morning, he put the exclamation point on it on my way over here. In my different lines of work, I serve here and I serve at a job during the weekdays, and then as we've talked before, I serve in the Tennessee National Guard as a chaplain. So basically, my life can be summed up as about 99.9% of it I'm in my car, and of those 99.9% of the time, about 100% of the time that I'm in that 99.9%, I'm speeding. All right, I think that speed limit signs are just mere suggestions to consider, and I rarely consider them. Most of the time it's like, 65. Who really wants to go 65? Because I got to get to where I'm going. So this morning I'm driving across this little parkway, and there's a faster route to go, but I like to go the parkway when I'm coming over here in the mornings because you drive the soybean fields and corn fields, and I usually see deer and turkey. It calms me. But it calms me in a way as I'm zipping down it. And sure enough, a sheriff clicked his lights on and pulled me over. And came out and he said, I'm pulling you over, Mr. Reynolds, because you were speeding. And I was like, yep, yeah, I was. I know it, you know it. Let's just, the lights are on. Everybody knows it now. I couldn't get my way. And every time a pastor gets pulled over, you start to go, all right, Lord, how ethical should I be right now? And I'm sitting there going, do I tell him where I'm going? Do I tell him what I'm doing? Do I soil the reputation of our church by doing that? And sure enough, he goes, where are you headed this morning? And I was like, all right, do I tell him I'm going to a cocaine deal or that I'm going to church? I was like, I'm heading over to Franklin. I'm going to church. And normally they'll go, what are you doing at church? I'm like, well, clearly I'm a sinner. He didn't ask what I did. Praise the Lord. And he goes, do you got anything on your record like in the last year? And I went, in the last year, no. In the last 2 weeks, perhaps. Explained that to him, and he walked back to his car just to make sure that I wasn't a cocaine dealer, which, because we're on camera, I'm not going to say if I am or I'm not. And he comes back up to the car and he said, hey, I had to pull you over 14 miles over. And I said, I know, but that 50 mile an hour sign was just up ahead. I was just speeding up to celebrate that. And he goes, just be safe and we'll let you go on. So this morning, I'd like to dedicate this sermon to Deputy Sheriff Steve Osner of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department. I know you're not watching because you're pulling people over like me, but someone out there knows Deputy Sheriff Osner. Send this message on to him with my appreciation for his grace. And I'll tell you this, that's not the last speeding ticket story you're about to hear. And it's one of those ones where I had a whole different intro, but I was like, all right, God, I get it. Because here's the truth. I was caught red-handed. I was guilty. I should have been given a ticket. And it was only by the mercy of this officer who either just felt bad for me going to church or he just didn't want to do the paperwork. Either way, I'll take it. But I was guilty. I was caught and I was guilty. And we're going to see this morning as we continue this journey through Exodus 32, we're going to see how God's people, the people that he made a covenant with, and we talked a little bit about that last week. He said, you are my people, I'm your God. And they said, yes, you are our God and we are your people. And then when the rubber met the road, to continue our analogy here of speeding, when the rubber met the road, when it hit the road, they totally went off the road. They completely were caught speeding, drinking and driving, doing all kinds of crazy, and they were caught red-handed. And today, we're going to look at the difficult passages of them getting caught and what was meant for that. And we're doing it through this dance. We're doing it through what we're calling the Bovine Ballet. And you're going to see here, it's not a ballet at all. It's an absolute hot mess. It's like going to your child or your grandchild's dance recital, and you know they've been practicing. You drive them there to practice every week, and you get them to the rehearsals, and you pay $8,000 for their costumes for the 2 dances and the total of 5 minutes they'll be on stage. And then you watch it, and you're like, what am I watching? Is this a fight? Because that's what it looks like. It's not a ballet at all. And that's what's going on here. Now, if you are kind of my age, I'm turning 38, and I know, thank you for saying, no, you're not that old. Thank you. Whoever said that, I'm pretty sure I heard somebody say, yeah, I am. You look at me, well-dressed, manicured, groomed, sexy even. And think, yeah, not that old. But in my age, and growing up with the dawn of cable TV, I learned to dance on Dance Party USA. Now, some of you in here, we won't say who, maybe Steve Jones, but we won't say specifics. You grew up on American Bandstand. That's where you learned to dance. And you learned nice, clean, wholesome dances. Dance Party USA was not nice, clean, or wholesome. But that's where I learned to dance. And so today we're going to have a little dance party, all right? As we walk through this scripture to understand it, we're going to see the dances that they were doing as they were in the midst of their sin, in the midst of their judgment, in the midst of God's frustration and even anger towards them. And so we're going to do a little dance today. We're going to do a little differently too. We're actually going to start at the back of our verses and we're going to work to the beginning of them rather than going our normal way of starting with verse 7 and working through 19. We're actually going to go 19 backwards. And that's okay. All right, I'm giving you pastoral permission to do that when you read the Bible. You don't always have to read it sequentially. You don't always have to go, I got to complete the book of John because Joel said read the book of John. No, you don't. If it doesn't work for you, go to Luke. Go to Acts. Read Ephesians. It's okay. It's totally okay. And sometimes you're going to get into these stories and go, I'm not totally grabbing what's going on here. Well, read ahead or start at the end and read backwards. And that's what we're going to do today because we want to kind of understand from the consequences. And that's what today is all about, the consequences of worshiping idols. And we're going to work back to what should have happened to them when they were caught. Clear as mud? And that's kind of where we're going to be today, all right? So if you've got your Bibles or an app on your phone or you have your iPad or you just have your worship guide in front of you, we're going to dig into Exodus 32, and I want you to go down to verse 19, and we're going to look at that together and kind of work backwards. Now, our first dance is the 2002 classic by Freak Nasty called The Dip. Because I put my hand up on your hip. When I dip, you dip, we dip. And we're going to start to see the dipping that was going on with these idols. So verse 19 in our journey today says this. And as soon as he came near to the camp and saw the calf and saw the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets out of his hands and he broke them at the foot of the mountain. Now again, we're starting at the back, so we've got to kind of put some things together because this seems pretty explosive, doesn't it? It says he showed up, and the he we learn later in the verse is Moses. Moses is the leader of Israel. Where's he been the last 2 weeks? Well, he's been up on the mountain with God, talking with God, meeting with God. Because not everybody could go up there, and it wasn't that the mountain wasn't big enough. It was that God is so great and so majestic that if everyone went up there, it would be chaos. Many of them would fall over dead in his glory because they would consider how absolutely wretched and sinful they are. And so God said, Moses, you come up. You come up and spend time with me, and I'm going to give you the guidelines. I'm going to give you the rules. I'm going to give you how to worship and how to do it. And he did it through the giving of these tablets, and he put 10 commandments on there. The first 2 commandments are worship God and don't worship idols. And we know, if you've been around the last 2 weeks or been watching online, we know that in the very first 6 verses of this chapter, they broke both of those. They didn't even get to the other 8. They shattered the first 2 triumphantly, incredibly, gloriously in their sin. They absolutely broke it bad. And it says Moses shows up. He basically shows up on day 2 of the celebration. We said last week there was a celebration. Aaron, who was Moses' second in command, he was the priest of the nation. He said, here is this golden cow. It and God has done great things for you. Let's celebrate. So Moses is showing up on the second day of this celebration, and they are doing dancing and eating and feasting and other things that are a bit more X-rated than the gathering should offer this morning. They were going bananas. They were going nuts. And he shows up, and it says he saw the calf, and then he saw their dancing. And that's where we get the whole title of this series. This whole dancing with cows, because they are in front of it dancing. And it wasn't just that they did it. It wasn't just that they made an idol. It's that they were dancing and fornicating and feasting and celebrating and worshiping in front of it. And Moses' response is one of absolute anger. It says he threw the tablets and shattered them. And we're looking at it because we're just starting in this one verse. Probably going through your mind is what would be going through mine if I was just looking at this one isolated verse. Maybe it wasn't as bad as we think it is. Well, Moses didn't get to be here for the first 2 weeks of this series. And we know that it's kind of bad. His response, though it's in anger, is sort of justified. He's not overreacting here. And to see that, let's go backwards, okay? Look in verse 17. Let's look at verses 17 and 18. Verses 17 and 18 says, when Joshua, well, who's Joshua? Joshua is kind of the third in command. This is the kid, he's a kid here, that Moses is mentoring to become the next leader of Israel. And that's necessary because Aaron has kind of blown it, hasn't he? And so he's got Joshua with him, and Joshua kind of went somewhat up the mountain. He waited for Moses, and then everyone else waited at the foot of the mountain. That same mountain that Moses just shattered the tablets on. It says, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. He said, there's a sound of war in the camp. That's how raucous it had become. That's how quickly we are taken from not worshiping an idol to worshiping an idol. It starts to sound like war. Idolatry sounds like war. Verbally, but more dangerously, internally, spiritually, emotionally, in our very hearts and souls. It sounds like war to God. Because your heart and my heart were created to connect with God. Our hearts were created to dance with God. But when we start to worship and celebrate these idols and do all the things that are painful and sinful and negative, our hearts start to do something that it was not created to do. It starts to make war. And Joshua says it doesn't sound like victory, and it definitely doesn't sound like defeat. We've got to learn from this. Idolatry will never bring victory, and it will never bring defeat. It will bring war, constant war. There's no settling. Do you see that? He said it sounds like war, not victory or defeat. It just sounds like war. The more that we go back to idols, the more it will keep us confused and in turmoil and in pain. It's a war that will never end. So why do we do it? Why do we keep going back there? Joshua says this to Moses because it's confusing to him. He says, it sounds like war, but it sounds like they're singing. Basically, he's saying to us, what they're doing makes no sense, but they're doing it. And so they're investigating here. So that's why Moses kind of flips out. That's why Moses gets pretty angry, doesn't he? Because absolute chaos is happening down here. Look real quick at verses 15 and 16. This is when Moses is leaving the mountain. It says, then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides. On the front and on the back they were written. And the tablets were the work of God. And the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Moses breaks these tablets. And it says here that these tablets were given to him by God, but they were written by God. God's hand carved these. God's finger said, here's what you're going to tell them. This and this and this. I'm going to give you 10 things. Put it on the front and on the back. Now take these to the people. And Moses has them in his hands and he goes down the mountain. Then all of a sudden it sounds like war. And then he gets down there and he's like, it doesn't sound like war. It is war. And they're dancing in front of this. They're doing all kinds of things that just seem crazy. And his response is probably the same response I would have. Many of you would have. Why do I have this? Why did I think I could leave you guys? Psh. Idolatry sounds like war. And he breaks these tablets, but it wasn't Moses that broke the tablets. It was the people that broke the tablets with their actions, with their attitudes, with their lack of faith, with their lack of trust that they could wait. They got in the midst of this ballet, they got in the midst of this dance party, and they put their hand into that golden cookie jar, and now they're caught. We've got to remember some things. And all series long, we're just remembering things because we're going to get caught up in idols sometimes. We've got to come back to what we know. We have to remember. We have to have things we have to realize. So let me give you this. We need to remember and realize that our dance will be different because of idols. It's going to be one that makes no sense to God, makes no sense to his scripture, makes no sense to your church. It is a dance that is insane, crazy, selfish, sinful. And our dance, the one dance that we have to dance with God, to connect with him, it's going to be different when we share it with idols. Now, our next dance, this is for those of you that you're seasoned. I'm not going to say you're old. You're seasoned. So let's kick it back to 1960 where Chubby Checker gave us the twist. What's the twist in this story? What's the twist in this dance that's going on? Well, that shows up in verse 14 as we work backwards through this. In verse 14 it says, and the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on the people. Again, we're just looking at this in isolation here, but it says a whole lot. It says that there is disaster that's coming. Do you notice that? If you have a physical Bible in front of you, if you have a tablet, you get scripture, underline that, circle it, highlight it, disaster. And it says God relents of that disaster. But nevertheless, there was disaster that was about to come. Know this. The people of Israel deserved disaster for what they did. Their idolatry deserved disaster. But we can't sit on our throne here and go, oh, how screwed up are they? How sinful. Man, what a lesson for them. Because the reason we're working through this is lessons for us. This is a lesson for me. It's why it's been painful for me to work through. And the reality is this, not only do they deserve disaster for their sin, we deserve disaster. Every single time we should be caught, we are trapped, we are guilty. About 10 years ago, I was in Chattanooga working at a church, but I was going to Birmingham twice a week to finish my master's degree. And I would head home on Thursday nights. I would do a whole day in class, and I'd drive 2.5 hours back to Chattanooga every Thursday. And as I've already shared, I don't believe in speed limits. And so I was zipping home, and that night was the big football game in the city between the two high schools that I had the most students at. As a youth pastor at the time. So every student that pretty much came on Wednesdays and Sundays to our programming, they were going to be at this game. And I was running late. And so running late, football game, don't like to drive the speed limit anyway. It's a bad mix, people. It's a bad mix. And so I'm zipping along, and I head across this bridge and getting close to where I needed to go to this football game, and all of a sudden I see blue lights behind me. And I thought to myself, I've really got to get to this football game. So that cop is irrelevant right now. And he's pretty far behind me. I'm just going to go ahead and take this exit. I go down to a stoplight, going, come on, change. It changes. I head on out. No, he's coming right behind me because I don't know if you know this, cops don't have to stop at traffic lights. Most of the time, I don't either, but they've got justification to do it. So here he is pulling over the youth minister at one of the bigger churches in town and conveniently in front of the liquor store. He said, where are you going? To a football game. And I'm like, ask me why I'm going to the football game, because I'm clearly not in high school. He didn't, but I was ready to go because I'm a youth minister. And I'm going to get some Jim Beam while I'm here. He goes, did you see me up on the highway? I said, highway? What highway? I only take back roads, clearly. I think you got the wrong car. He goes, you saw me, and you thought you could get off, and you thought you could get away. And then I'm mad. I don't know why I'm mad, because I am caught. I'm red-handed here. Because it was the 30th of the month. It was the last day of the month. And so I, in my anger, go, yeah, and you're just pulling me over because you've got a quota to meet, don't you? He takes my license and my insurance. He walks back. He runs it up, realizes that I'm a chronic offender of traffic laws. He walks back up and says, here's your ticket. Drive safely. And I take off, frustrated, angry. But I was caught. So the next week I go to call the county clerk's office and just pay it over the phone. And she goes, types it in, Mr. Reynolds, you got to come to court. I said, what? I said, it's just a traffic ticket. It's a speeding ticket. And she goes, yeah, it is. But he wrote on the ticket in all capital letters with several exclamation points, do not settle. I was caught. I was trapped. I was guilty. That's what's happening here with Israel. They are caught. They are trapped. They are guilty. And God says, I'm going to bring disaster to them. I'm going to bring disaster to them. Why would he do this? This seems so out of character for God. It's not that God gets off bringing disaster and pain and hurt and discipline to our lives. It's not that God is what Monty Python says. He's a big finger in the sky who shoots lightning bolts at us. God is a God of justice. And friends, whether you're checking us out for the first time or you're watching us online, just kind of going, I keep hearing stuff about it, I'm going to just check into this God thing. Know this, it's a good thing that God is a God of justice. It's a very good thing because God is holy. And I'll tell you this, I've run after many idols in my life, but I keep coming back to God because I want a holy God. I don't want a golden cow that allows me the comfort, at least I think the comfort, to do whatever the heck I want. I want a holy God. Friends, if God isn't holy, he's not God. And he's not worth knowing. And he's definitely not worth singing about. And he's definitely not worth learning about. God is holy, and that's just who he is. And in his holiness, justice sometimes has to come. And it has to come to people like me who continually go off the path of selfishness, thinking, I can figure this out and I can do better, just like the nation of Israel did. They were caught and disaster was going to come to them. But we see in this verse here, it says that God said, I won't bring disaster. He relented of that. That's a good thing too, because God's merciful. We don't just want a holy God, we want a merciful, holy God. But how does he get to the place where he's like, all right, I won't bring disaster? Well, let's look what Moses did. Moses did three things in the verses leading up to this. In verse 13, it says, Moses says to him, remember Abraham and Isaac and Israel. We'll talk about them in a future series, but these were pretty important people in the history of Israel. Remember them, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. Moses goes to God and says, hey God, remember what you did for these people. He didn't say they don't deserve what they're about to get. He says they're guilty. I saw it myself. I'm pretty mad right now. But remember what you've promised. You promised to do great things. He says, don't let this be the last word. These are people that you have done great. You brought them out of Egypt. You saved them, and you've promised them something. We're going there, God. Let us have another chance. I know you're a just and a holy and a righteous God, but you're merciful too. I've sensed it in my life, and they've seen it. Give us another chance. Remember what you promised. In verse 12, look at what he says. This is Moses speaking to God. He said, why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Moses is pretty bold here, isn't he? Because not only is he confronting God, going, God, don't do this. He's telling God things that God already knows. Hey, that whole Egypt thing, God, you did that. They're saying it's the golden cow, but you did it, God. I remember it because I was there. Relent from this disaster. Don't consume them. What he's saying is, remember their enemies. Don't let Egypt go, good thing they got out of here. It was pretty tough on us, but it's really bad on them. So don't let their enemies have another word in this. Don't let their enemies go, that's not a God worth knowing, because look what he does. Even if it's justified, look how mean he is. I'm sure you've never heard that from your friends going, I can't get on this God thing because he looks like a pretty mean guy. He's not mean. He's just. He's holy. And sometimes that means we've got to be disciplined for what we've done, just like Israel needed to be disciplined. And their discipline was about to be great. But verse 11 is where it kind of all ties together as we work backwards. In verse 11 it says, but Moses implored the Lord his God and said, oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you've brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Now we're working backwards and we're like, Moses is telling God, don't burn with anger. And we know from verse 17, he burned with anger, didn't he? He hadn't gotten there yet, but we know that's why we're working backwards, kind of see the whole craziness that's going on here. Moses goes to God and he implores God, is what the verse says. He goes to God and he's trying to convince him. He's speaking to him passionately. God, don't do this. Why does it have to be this way? Moses gets this because he had a past himself. Moses was a murderer. People knew that he had murdered. They said, you're the murderer, right? And when that happened, Moses ran and he hid. He was trying to get away from his own past. Moses had a past and God had saved him and called him. Israel now had a past and God had called them. He'd saved them. He's like, let's put all this together here, God. It's a good thing Moses said what he said, because we've learned that God said, all right, no disaster. No disaster. We need somebody on our side. The day that I called the clerk, and they said, we're not going to let you pay over the phone. You've got to come to court. Don't settle. I got off the phone and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've really done it this time. So my next call was to my good friend and Sunday school teacher, Mitchell Bird, Esquire, attorney at law. I said, hey Mitch, it's Joel. He said, hey Joel, you must have gotten a speeding ticket, because that's the only time I ever called Mitchell. He helped me through many a ticket. Mitchell's gone home to be with the Lord. He passed away from a tough battle with cancer a few years ago. And when I went to the time to meet with the family, I just kept saying to them, I really loved your husband. I really loved your dad. Not just because he got me out of speeding tickets, but I called Mitchell and I said, Mitchell, I need some help here. We need help. When we're caught, when we are trapped, when we are absolutely guilty, we need help. We need someone on our side. And Israel had Moses. But here's the thing that really keeps coming into my head. Moses is gone. He's not going to walk in here to the gathering today and be like, hey, I know you've blown it this week. I got you. I'll go talk to God because I'm not brave enough to do it. I need Moses. Moses is what we call in the Old Testament a forerunner. He's a forerunner for Jesus. And we've got to find Jesus in this, and we see it through the man Moses. He is a forerunner of Jesus. He's doing what Jesus now does for us. Every time we blow it, every time we worship an idol, every time we sin, Jesus is there doing what Moses has done, going to God and saying, God, remember their past, remember their enemies, imploring him, convincing him, don't do it, not this time, give them another chance, give them mercy, which helps us, and we need to be reminded this morning, our dance needs a dance partner, it needs a spiritual dance partner. We need a Moses, but we have a greater Moses. We have Jesus, and he has come to dance with you, with me. We need that in our dance. One last tune, and then I'll shut up, okay? Let's go to 1992, when I was just a spry sophomore in high school. And a hit came out. Now, I lived in the north, okay? So we didn't listen to country music. Hopefully Dave Ennis isn't going to throw a keyboard at me this morning. But a song came out that it didn't matter if you liked rap or rock or anything in between. Everyone did the Achy Breaky Heart. Everybody loved the modern classic by Billy Ray Cyrus. And he may have been thinking ahead because like a wrecking ball, God was about to come in to these people. In verse 10, it says this, now therefore let me alone. This isn't Moses talking, friends. This is God speaking now. Let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. God is angry, but he's not angry just to be angry. He's angry because his heart is broken. Idolatry breaks God's heart. It absolutely crushes his heart. That's why he's not a God of lightning bolts and thunder. He's a God who has a tender heart for you, for me, for Israel. And it breaks his heart when we turn to idols and when we do it repeatedly. And when we get there, we go bananas. He says, leave me alone so I can consume them. We know because we're working backwards that he holds back. And Moses did a great thing. He acted as Jesus and saying to God, don't do this, not right now. Give them another chance. And God says to him, let me consume them so I can make a great nation out of you. This is why Moses is way better than me. Because God's basically going, I'll wipe them off, but I'm going to leave you alive, Moses, and I'm going to fulfill my promise in you. If I was Moses, I'd been like, deal, deal. That sounds good to me. Get rid of them. I didn't like them anyway. But we know that Moses heard that and then turned to God and said, no. I know you're just. I know they're guilty. I know they deserve disaster, but not right now. Verses 8 and 9 say they have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They've made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who've brought you out of the land of Egypt. Verse 9 says, and the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. We don't use stiff-necked people very often, do we? That doesn't have good modern connotation. But know this was the original 4-letter word in the Old Testament. It was the original 16-letter word in the Old Testament. This was a rude, rough way to describe them. It is saying they will not turn to me even though I've done things for them. They will not turn to me even though I've shown them love, even though I've brought them out of slavery, even though I've saved them. Their necks stay connected to that golden idol. If I can be really honest, I'm a stiff-necked person. More often than not. The only day that my neck tends to get flexible is Sundays because I've got to be the pastor. But just come and see me in the morning. You'll see how stiff-necked I can be. And I deserve to be punished for it. I deserve God's fury. The fury that he's about to pour out on them. I'm going to consume them. Idolatry breaks God's heart. Verse 7. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Look what he does. He does what you do to your spouse when your kids are being really bad. Go deal with your son. Go talk to your daughter. I'm not saying I've ever done it, but I'm sure you have. Your kids did this. That's what God is saying to Moses. Go down to your people who you brought out of Egypt. It's confusing here, isn't it? That's how upset everyone is. Israel's worshiping a golden cow saying, it brought us out of Egypt. Moses is going, God, no, you brought them out of Egypt. And God's going, no, Moses, you brought them out of Egypt. Nobody wanted these people because they're guilty. Isn't that incredible? They're absolutely guilty. Everybody's going, And God's so hurt, he's so frustrated because he says they've corrupted themselves. To be corrupted in the Hebrew, which is the original language of Exodus, means to spoil or to ruin. God saved them to make them something great, and they've spoiled it, they've ruined, they've corrupted themselves. Idolatry ultimately corrupts us. Every single time. And it will smell like war, and it will break God's heart, and it will bring pain into our lives. If you hear anything from this series, hear that. Keep worshiping that golden idol if you want to, but it's going to corrupt you. It's going to ruin you. It's going to spoil you. We started last week this working definition that we kind of put together throughout the series, and it's there in your notes. It says this. Our working definition is, idolatry is worship of something other than God that we believe is safe and we seek comfort in. That will ultimately corrupt us, ultimately ruin us, and it fires God up. Not that he's a wishy-washy God who's good at one minute and then angry the next. That's just part of his character, just like it is yours. Just like it is mine. We get fired up sometimes, and it fires God up because his heart is breaking. And it fires Moses up. We saw what he did. He broke the tablets that God made for him, that God wrote on. And then he talks God down. And fire is going to be brought on Israel. They are guilty. They're caught red-handed in the golden calf cookie jar. After my phone call to Judge Bean, to Mitchell Bird, he made a phone call to Judge Bean. Judge Bean was a Sunday school teacher at my church. I don't know if there's any legal people here, but I need you, obviously. I tend to only go to church. Like when they interview me, I'd be like, all right, tell me about the legal community here. Tell me about the government officials, because I'm going to need them. My lawyer, my dance partner, he calls Judge Bean. And I had to go to Judge Bean's court because they couldn't settle. And I had only seen Judge Bean from afar. He knew who I was because he said so when I walked slowly up that aisle and stood in front of his bench. And the judge, who had every right to throw the book at me, he looked down and he goes, I know who you are. I said, good, because I know who you are. The guy who's about to take away my driver's license. He goes, were you heading somewhere? I said, I was, Judge Bean. I was going to the football game. I was going to be a good minister. I just wasn't in all the time leading up to going to that football game. He said, you got kids now, don't you? I said, yes, sir. He goes, you got to slow down. You got to take care of those kids. He goes, but our church needs you. You got to slow down. You got to take care of yourself. We need you. He goes, I'm going to write settled on this ticket. I didn't have to pay anything. I didn't get the punishment. I should have paid. I should have gotten punishment. But he wrote settled on that ticket because he knew me. He remembered me. He knew my past. He knew my sins. He knew my guilt. He knew that he was just and I was not. And he could throw the book at me. And he didn't because he knew me. God knows you. God knows you. He knows everything you've done. He knows the mistakes that you've made that you don't even know is a mistake yet. He knows you. And it breaks his heart when we turn away from him. It breaks his heart when we become stiff-necked. We deserve all the punishment he's going to throw at us. But when God looks at us and Jesus gets in his ear and says, hold on, God, remember them. Remember their past. Remember what you've done for them. Not this time, God, not this time. We realize something incredible here today. When God's passion burned hot, when Moses' anger burned hot, there was one other person here. It was Jesus. And Jesus' love burned strong for you. No matter what you've done, no matter how guilty you were, no matter how guilty I was, it burned strong. And it reminds us of the most important thing today. There is a chance for a new dance, a different dance. There is a chance that our dance with idols doesn't have to be the last dance. Though we've broken God's heart, though we need people to step in for us, though we're guilty and deserve disaster, it does not have to be the last because of the cross, because of what Jesus has done. With Jesus, we have a partner who wants to dance with you. He wants to dance with me in freedom and love and grace and hope and new life. As messed up as I am, I'm going to choose that today. And as strongly as I can encourage you, do the same. He wants to dance in new life with you, regardless of your past, regardless of your guilt. He wants to dance with you. So I encourage you, friends, reach your hand out. It may be shaky. It may be filled with guilt. It may be in need of more love than you ever think anybody could offer, and know that he's going to receive that and say, your debt is settled. Your guilt is covered. Your life is going to be different. When we're done here, you know I love bananas. I'm going to skip my banana and I'll be right here, loitering with intent, because I want to tell you about how Jesus saved me. And I'd love for him to save you, to say to you, I am your dance partner. And your dance with these idols, it's not working. That's why you're here. Let me heal your pain. Let me show you grace. Let me give you mercy. Avoid disaster. Reach out to him because he's reaching out to you. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for what Jesus has done. Oh, thank you for what he's done. Because we deserve everything that you should throw at us. Every bit of guilt is ours, God. The mistakes, the sin, it's us. It's on us. So thank you that Jesus stepped in, and he did it in a far greater way than Moses ever could. Stepped in, got your ear, and said, hold on. That's my dance partner. I love them. I believe in them. I know, given another chance, they will accept new life. Father, do that now in our midst. Do that now in that one heart today, right here in this room that is running. Draw them back to you and show them that your arms are open wide. No matter how guilty we are, no matter how deserving we are of disaster, your arms are open wide saying, come home and be a part of this dance of grace. Pour out your grace upon us now, dear Jesus. Pour out your grace upon us. Thank you for your desire to love us, serve us, and save us, and dance with us forever. May that be so now in this place, in these people, for your name and for your glory now and forevermore. Amen and amen. So glad you guys are here today. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Thanks for still being my friend, even though I speed. It's to get here quicker because I love being with you guys. And I'm probably going to speed next Sunday because it's our last day in this series. And we're going to be talking about idol smoothies. Delicious. But it's going to be the kind of conclusion to all this, because we've seen where idolatry comes from, what it does to us, what it does to God. And next we've got to learn kind of what the resultant is all of this. So come on back and see what they have to do because of this. God relents in his disaster, but consequences still have to be made. And it's not fun to hear, but it's there and it's true and it's real. I've sensed it in my life, and I bet some of you feel the same way too. So come back and hear about this so we can know. I don't want to go down that road. So what do I need to do today? So come back and join us. And your homework is this. I want you to go through Exodus 32 one more time. All right, just give me one more time. Read it through, kind of get it fresh in your mind from verse 1 all the way through the end. But I also want you to go to the book of Deuteronomy, which is just a couple books over, and go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy chapter 4. And we're going to see kind of how all of this is settled in the future. All right, so we're gonna today we worked backwards. Next week we're gonna jump ahead, and we're gonna see what God does in all this. And I want you to read ahead to get a feel of what's going on there, because he shows incredible mercy when he doesn't have to, and incredible grace when he doesn't have to, for them, for me, and for you. You guys got it? Good. All right, I'm going to dismiss y'all. Have a great day. We love y'all. God bless.